Okay, today is Friday. It's 3:50 p.m. It is November 14th. I was exchanging a dialogue with a trading buddy of mine who's in North Carolina. And then, uh, now he is fairly consistent as of this year. And he's on track to make about $30,000 this month in day trading. Now he's halfway there. and uh, and so there was a dialogue that processed, and he was extremely confident he was extremely confident in what was needed for him to be consistent. Then he mentioned something about mastering the process. So he has mastered the process. Okay. So it got me thinking about what that process really is. Okay. So uh, then I realized there is a correlation between a restaurant and trading, which is essentially uh, the process is a recipe. Okay. So when a hamburger is made, it requires a specific recipe and how to in order to make the hamburger. And the process is defining how a trade is made. So, so uh, what I haven't been able to do for the past 5 years is to incorporate the experience and the knowledge to build a process. I attempted to build a process about 3 years ago, but was unable to do that because I lacked the information and experience to compile that process. So, so when, so essentially, consistency comes from having a process. Consistency comes from utilizing that process, and because the process has been fully defined, the process is used over and over again to to process a trade from beginning to the end. And uh, what makes it a foundation of trading is because it creates consistency. Okay, it creates consistency. When McDonald's uh, and the restaurant that I work at make millions of hamburgers, then the first hamburger and the last hamburger has to be consistent. It doesn't matter who cooks it, it has to be consistent. Then I have to ask myself this question. So, what makes something consistent? Now, consistency is based on the the environment that is used. So there's three parts of consistency in cooking. Okay, at least three major ones. The first and a very important thing is a recipe. A recipe. A recipe uses. So this is very similar to trading. Okay, so the first part is called a recipe and the food item, and the third. So the first part is recipe. The second part is the food that's used. Okay, and then the equipment that's used to the equipment then personnel to use to process the hamburger. Okay, that the three things allows it to be consistent. Just like trading, anybody can trade. So and the same thing with cooking. Anybody can cook as long as you have the equipment, you have the food item, and then you have the recipe. Those are the three things that are required. On top of that, you need the knowledge and the experience to put all those together to make it a consistent thing. But as long as that recipe is copied exactly the way it is, with consistency in the the food, uh, and the equipment that is consistent. Okay. For instance, when you make a crouton, it's a oven is used. As long as that oven is consistent from top to bottom, with 6 trays, then then the croutons will be consistent from top to bottom. That's one where the equipment matters, how something is consistent. Okay. Now, how do I apply that? How do I apply that knowledge into trading? Okay. So trading is very, very similar to it, which means the another word for recipe in trading is called the process. Okay. So the process is essentially the recipe of a restaurant, and that's what cooking. That's what trading is, a process. Okay. So then, if I were to uh, expand upon that and try to associate what the food item is and also the equipment that's used. Okay, so when trading, if I'm to make a if I am able to make a connection between the cooking world to the trading world, is first of all, the process is the recipe. That's one. Okay, that's obvious. The second part, okay, so if I'm talking about the equipment, I'm talking about my computer that I'm using, and the software that I'm using. Okay, and now I'm thinking about, so what is the food item that I'm using in order to make make the trades? So the food item is essentially, what is that? So if I were to extrapolate on that, so basically in order to compile a hamburger, it requires the bun and meat and another bun, right? Wrapping around. That's it. So how do I define that in trading? Now, defining that in trading is essentially, what am I working with? So what am I working with in trading? Essentially, it's a security. The security is either the EU or Euro USD, uh, uh, abbreviated as EU. Okay, or it's XAU, or it's gold. Okay, and the other is uh, USD JPY, okay, which is essentially US dollar versus Japanese yen, right? So the other is UC, which is essentially the Swiss franc versus the USD. And there's also the Nasdaq and the Dow and and S&P 500, right? So if I were to define it, the materialistic things that defines a food item in trading essentially is the security. Okay, the security and everything else around it is the equipment, and myself is comprising of what's involved in making the trading. Okay, as part of the equipment side is concerned. So the food item is essentially, for example, is the UC. Okay, which is essentially US dollar versus the Swiss franc. Okay, so that is a vehicle that I'm using in order to make a connection between trading and cooking. Okay, so that those things, they are now they are now one-to-one correlation between cooking and trading. All right. So the process, I briefly now I've been trading for 5 years and I haven't been able to compile this process, and I am defining this process now. Okay, I feel that I now have the knowledge and the experience to compile this process, a meaningful process, whereas lack of experience and knowledge uh, clearly clearly creates a process that has holes in it, where where we're using essentially the process equivalent to recipe can't be used because it hasn't been fully vetted out. Okay, through knowledge and experience, now I can take this process and fully populate it and vet it out, and then use it as a consistent vehicle for making the right trade. Okay, so I've started on to this is the first part of creating this process now, because it's so important in order to become consistency. Essentially is made up of those three items. Okay, the consistency is made up of those three items, right? Which is the process, the security, and the tool, right? And as long as I have those things that are there, the recipe is going to the recipe is going to essentially define the experience. Okay, it's going to incorporate the experience into the recipe. Okay, that's where the experience comes from. And so anybody who can grab onto that, it essentially has the experience to create a trade, a process that has been fully vetted along with those three items: the process, the security, and the trading equipment. Those are the three things that makes up a, a process that creates uh, consistency. Without it, it's inconsistent. Just like cooking. Cooking, it's amazing to me. I've been working as a dishwasher and a prep cook for 5 years, and I haven't been able to make that connection. Now I am able to make that connection. It's amazing how closely related it is in making a hamburger to making a trade. I had no idea. I had no idea. Okay, I had absolutely no idea how how significant. I had no idea how significant it is. And then I thought to myself, okay, so now in the past I've been working as an engineer, okay? But I've been doing that without really thinking about the foundation of being a consistent engineer, okay? So the consistency of being an engineer requires in itself its own unique characteristics that I need to fully vet out in order to be consistent. Okay? So if I were to think about, okay, so how do I become a consistent engineer, right? It is all the same as being a consistent trader, right? So you have to get enough sleep. You have to get enough sleep. You have to eat well, okay? And you have to have the knowledge and the experience, okay? And then you have to have an avenue where you're constantly growing. Okay, so those are the finely defined things that are required in order to be consistent as an engineer. Okay, I never thought about that. Okay, I thought you graduate from college, you do your stuff, and then that was it. I didn't think further into detail of how to how to evolve into a more effective and impactful engineer. Okay, that's why I've been fired many times, right? So now trading is the same thing, because if I look at, it's like every challenge is an employment. Every hamburger is an employment. Every hamburger, every hamburger, every trade, every challenge, and every project is an opportunity to progress into a consistency at a higher level, at a higher level, and higher level. And ingredients, these ingredients in these ingredients in becoming consistent is consistently the same across the spectrum of any discipline. Okay? That and the foundation of what I've defined are the three things, okay? Which essentially is define the process. which is the recipe. Okay, I already know what the security is, and those securities behave slightly different, but they do behave very similarly because it has very similar candlestick formations, but there will be slight differences in the way that the security is, uh, uh, the leverage size is. So that makes it different. Okay, it could be more volatile. It has tighter spreads and things like that. Okay, so the third part is the equipment that I'm using. Okay, so the latter two uh, is a concrete definition of what is what exists on a concrete basis. What is a what is what is clearly based on experience and on the level of competency is defining the process, okay, and how I follow the process, okay. So even in cooking, I can have the best recipe, but as if nobody follows it, then the hamburger is going to turn out to be something else. Okay, the hamburger is going to be so a master chef, a a world class chef uh, who created the recipe and who owns that same restaurant will be standing next to you, and then you'll be that 19-year-old who's been tasked to cook hamburgers, and it's your second week, and that master chef who created that menu, who's been doing that for 3 or 4 decades, is standing next to you and says your burger is crap. That means there is a lack of understanding of the recipe, the lack of understanding the food item, the lack of understanding of the equipment that's being used to make that hamburger. So I'm seeing this Catholic deacon who's also a master chef standing next to me, and I'm making a trade. And obviously, a master chef can look at exactly what I'm doing, okay, even though it's not cooking, and he can tell whether I'm competent or not. And he'll be saying to me, your trade is crap. Okay. So now, uh, so now I have to define these things, which I am currently doing. So that'll be the second part of this YouTube video. Okay, this is the first part. Um, I realized how important it was in the past, but I just the lack of experience and knowledge didn't really put. Even though it was costing me every penny that I made, it just really didn't register until now. It just didn't register until now how important that is. So I'm in the process of defining my the process, and also having an idea how the security moves, and it's in by itself is a good idea too. And becoming an expert in the tools reduces the errors that I make. For instance, this so essentially Funding Pips has this trading platform, and I can make a trade based on a predefined price. But sometimes I have to click on a button in order to get switch into that mode. But once in a while, when I'm tired late at night at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm making a trade, I'll forget and I'll click on it, and then it just turns out I just made the trade right there where it's unfavorable for me. So that's something that I need to become more familiar with. Okay. So how do I sum this YouTube video? It's essentially, so what did I cover? I essentially covered about the similarity between cooking and all the other disciplines about trading, and those three items are the process, okay, the security, and the equipment. Those are the three foundations of trading. And what I will be focusing on at this stage with a less emphasis on the security and the tools. I'll cover that later. Is essentially is defining the process. Okay, the process, These three things uh, is consistency. Okay, so so consistency is achieved by fully vetting out the process, vetting out the security, and vetting out the tool that I'm using. So vetting out those three things is creating consistency. Okay.